The metal groaned above me, and I froze in place, listening for the sound again. It came a second time, louder, like something heavy shifting inside a wreck that should have been silent for days. My name is Veshtal, and I was not supposed to be near that wreck at all. Our scavenger crew had found the human shuttle burning cold in a debris field, 3 days after raiders tore it apart looking for cargo. We were not raiders. We were smaller than that, quieter than that, a handful of Kathiri who lived on scraps because our whole species had run out of places to call home. We took what the raiders left behind, broken parts, empty containers, things nobody else wanted. I was not supposed to hear breathing where there should have been none. Dessa, who flew with me on every run since we were hatchlings together, grabbed my arm before I could move toward the sound. Her eyes were wide behind her visor. "Leave it," she said. "Whatever made that noise, it is not ours to find." But I had already seen the shape behind the broken bulkhead. Small, curled tight, breathing. I want to explain, before I go further, exactly how much danger I placed myself in by walking closer instead of walking away. Every Kathiri hatchling learns the same lesson before they learn to fly. Never let a spacefaring species see you. Never let them learn you exist. And above every other species in the galaxy, humans were the name whispered with the most fear. Other small races told stories about them, stories about fleets that could burn a planet from orbit, about wars fought and won so completely that entire species vanished from the star charts. Nobody I knew had ever met a human. Nobody wanted to. The rule was simple. If you see a human ship, you run. If you find human wreckage, you take the metal and leave everything else exactly where it lies. I did not leave. Behind the bulkhead, wedged into a gap barely wider than my own body, was a human child. She could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old by human counting, though I had no real way to know their aging at the time. Her skin was pale under a layer of dust and dried blood that was not fresh, which told me the injury was old, already healing badly on its own. Her jacket had a name stitched into the collar in human letters. I could not read it then. I would learn it later. Ivy. She was alive. That was the only fact that mattered to me in that moment. More than the rule, more than the fear, more than every warning I had carried since I was small enough to fit inside my mother's wing. "Veshtal," Dessa said again, and this time her voice cracked. "If anyone finds out we did this, they will exile us. Maybe worse. She will die if we do nothing," I said. Dessa did not answer. She only looked at the child, then at me, then back at the child, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, the same thing that was shifting behind mine. It is a strange thing, fear. It can hold you perfectly still, right up until the moment something more urgent than fear walks into the room and asks for your help. I reached into the gap and lifted her out. She did not wake. Her breathing was shallow and fast, the kind of breathing that comes right before a body gives up trying. I had seen that breathing before, in hatchlings who did not survive the long journey after our home was lost. I was not going to watch it happen again if I could stop it. We carried her back to our transport in silence, wrapped in an emergency thermal sheet meant for our own kind, far too large for her small frame. Dessa flew. I held the child against my chest the entire way back to the colony, feeling her heartbeat through the fabric, counting each one like it was a small miracle that might stop at any moment. The colony we called home was not a home in any way the word usually means. It was a hollowed-out asteroid, patched together with scavenged hull plates and borrowed atmosphere generators, hidden inside a debris belt so thick that no scanner from the outside had ever picked us up. We had maybe 300 Kathiri living there, all that remained after our actual homeworld became unlivable 2 generations ago. We did not have surplus medicine. We did not have surplus food. We definitely did not have a plan for what to do with a human child who was not supposed to exist in our world at all. Elder Korash met us at the landing bay before I had even powered down the engines. He was the closest thing we had to a leader, an old Kathiri who had survived the loss of our homeworld as a young adult and carried every lesson from that disaster like a weight strapped to his back. He took one look at what I was carrying, and his feathers along his neck rose straight up, which for our kind is the clearest sign of alarm there is. "Tell me that is not what I think it is," he said. "She needs medical help," I said. "Now, not after a debate. Do you understand what you have brought into this colony?" His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath it, the same fear every Kathiri carried about humans, sharpened now into something immediate and real. If her people come looking for her, they will find us. And if humans find us, Veshtal, we are finished. Everything we have built here, everything we have hidden for 2 generations, gone in a single day. Then we will deal with that when it happens, I said. She will not survive the night without help. I am not asking your permission. I am telling you what I am going to do. I do not know where that certainty came from. I had never spoken to Elder Korash that way in my life. But something about holding that small, fading heartbeat against my chest had rearranged my priorities faster than any lesson I had ever been taught. Rules exist to protect the many, but sometimes a single life in your hands outweighs every rule you were ever given. Korash stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he stepped aside. "Take her to Mira," he said quietly, "and Veshtal. Whatever happens because of this decision, it is yours to answer for, not the colony's." I did not argue, I ran. Mira was our healer, an older Kathiri who had trained in medicine back when our species still had proper facilities and proper teachers. She had never treated a human before. None of us had. She worked from instinct and from old data files we still kept from before the loss of our world, records of other species, other biologies, anything that might tell her what a human body needed to survive. I stood outside the medical bay for hours while Mira worked, listening to Dessa pace beside me and say nothing, because there was nothing left to say. I thought about the name stitched into that jacket collar. Ivy. I did not know if it was a name or a word or nothing at all, but I found myself repeating it quietly, over and over, like it might somehow help. When Mira finally opened the door, her feathers were flat against her skull with exhaustion, but her eyes held something I had not expected. Relief. "She will live," Mira said. "Her body is stronger than I expected. Whatever kept her alive out there, alone, for as long as she was alone, it was not luck, it was will." I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since I had heard that first sound behind the bulkhead. I stepped into the room and looked down at her. She was smaller in the medical bed than she had seemed in my arms, wrapped now in bandages sized for a Kathiri hatchling because we had nothing built for a human. Her chest rose and fell steadily, evenly. Alive. "What happens now?" Dessa asked from the doorway. I did not have an answer for her. I only knew that whatever the colony decided, whatever Elder Korash chose to do with the 2 of us who had broken the oldest rule our people had, I was not going to let anyone take this child and leave her somewhere to die simply because her existence frightened us. She stirred slightly in her sleep, her small hand curling into the edge of the blanket, and made a soft sound that was not quite a word. I do not know why it affected me the way it did. Perhaps because in that sound I heard the same thing I had heard in every hatchling I had ever comforted after our homeworld was lost. Fear, and the need for someone, anyone, to prove that fear wrong. I sat down beside her bed and did not leave for the rest of the night. I told myself it was only until she woke up, only until I was certain she would survive. I told myself many things that night, sitting in a chair too small for comfort, watching a human child breathe in a colony that had spent 2 generations hiding from everything her species represented. None of what I told myself turned out to be true. I did not leave her side the next day either, or the day after that. Something had shifted in me the moment I lifted her out of that wreck, something that had nothing to do with rules or fear or the survival calculations that governed every decision our colony made. I did not yet understand what I was starting. I only knew that I could not undo it, and more than that, I did not want to. Elder Korash returned the next morning, standing in the doorway of the medical bay with an expression I could not quite read. He looked at the sleeping child for a long time before he spoke. "You understand this cannot stay secret forever," he said. "I know," I answered. and you understand what it will mean, for her and for us, when it stops being secret. I looked down at Ivy, at the small rise and fall of her breathing, at the bandage across her arm that Mira had wrapped with more gentleness than I had ever seen her use on one of our own wounded. I thought about the fear that had governed every choice our people made, since the day our homeworld became a memory instead of a place. I thought about how tired I was of that fear deciding everything for us. I understand, I said, but I am not sorry. Korash did not answer right away. He simply nodded, once, and left the room without another word. It was not approval, it was not forgiveness. But it was not exile either, and in that moment, it was enough. Outside the small window of the medical bay, the debris field drifted past in silence, hiding us the same way it had hidden us for 2 generations. I did not know yet that everything about our hiding was about to change. I only knew that whatever came next, I would not let go of the small hand now resting against mine, not for any rule, not for any fear, not for anything at all. 6 months passed before Ivy said her first word to me, and when it came, it was not in any language I expected. She sat cross-legged on the floor of my quarters, sorting through a pile of scrap metal pieces I had given her as toys, and she looked up at me with those quick, curious eyes and said, "Home." I did not understand the word yet. Mira had been teaching herself human language from old data files, piecing together fragments, and she had taught a little of it to me and Dessa as we cared for the child together. But that single word, spoken so simply, so certainly, as she looked around my small quarters filled with scavenged furniture and borrowed blankets, needed no translation at all. I understood it perfectly. She had decided this was home, not because it was safe or comfortable or anything like what she must have known before the wreck. She had decided it because we were there, because Dessa sang to her in the evenings, off-key and full of warmth, because Mira checked on her every single day, even after she no longer needed medical care, simply to see her smile, because I sat with her until she fell asleep, every night, without fail. It should have made me happy. In many ways it did, but it also made the danger sharper, because a child who thought of our hidden colony as home was a child who might one day speak of it to someone who should never learn it existed. Elder Korash had allowed us to keep her, but allowance was not the same as peace. The colony was divided in ways I had not fully understood until I began to feel the weight of it myself. There were Kathiri, who smiled at Ivy in the corridors, who left small gifts outside my door, scraps of fabric shaped into simple toys, pieces of dried fruit saved from someone's own ration. And there were Kathiri who would not look at either of us at all, who spoke in low voices when they thought I could not hear, using words like danger and burden and end of everything we built. I tried not to let it reach her. Children understand more than adults expect them to, and I did not want her carrying the weight of a divided colony on shoulders that small. But I could not shield her from everything, and one evening, as I walked her back from Mira's quarters, we passed a group of Kathiri elders speaking outside the food stores. "Resources we cannot spare," one of them was saying. "Every ration we give that child is a ration one of our own hatchlings does not receive." Ivy's hand tightened in mine. She did not understand the words, not fully, but she understood the tone, the same way any child understands worry and fear, even across the widest gaps of language. She looked up at me with a question in her eyes that I did not know how to answer honestly. "They are worried," I told her later, once we were alone, using the simple words she now understood. "Not about you, about all of us, about what happens if the wrong people find this place." "Because of me," she said. It was not a question. "No," I said, and I meant it with everything I had. "Because we are small, and the universe is not always kind to small things. That was true long before you came to us." I do not know if she believed me, but she reached for my hand again as we walked, and I held it, and that was enough for both of us that night. The resource strain was real, though, whatever comfort I tried to give her. Our colony had never been rich. We grew what food we could in cramped hydroponic bays, rationed water with careful precision, and repaired old equipment because we could not afford new. Ivy needed things we had never needed to provide before. Food suited to a human body, which took Mira weeks of careful testing to determine safely. Warmth, since human bodies apparently could not manage the cold we kept our corridors at to save power. Medicine, when a fever took her hard during her first winter with us, and Mira spent 3 sleepless nights at her bedside, mixing formulas from old human medical files and hoping, in her own quiet way, that she had gotten the measurements right. She had. Ivy recovered, but the cost of that recovery, in medicine we could not easily replace, in power diverted from other systems to keep her room warm enough, in food shared that might have gone to a Kathiri hatchling instead, became another weight added to the growing argument about whether keeping her was worth what it cost us. I understood both sides of that argument, even as I stood firmly on one of them. I was not blind to the sacrifice. I simply believed, with a certainty I could not fully explain even to myself, that some choices are not measured only in resources. Some choices are measured in what kind of people we become by making them. Dessa felt the same way, though she carried it differently than I did. Where I argued with quiet stubbornness in colony meetings, Dessa simply acted, finding ways to stretch resources further, teaching Ivy to help in small ways around the colony so that she was not only a cost but also a contribution. By the time Ivy was 7, she could sort scrap metal faster than most adult Kathiri, could tend the hydroponic bays with surprising care, and had learned enough of our language to translate for Mira when the old human data files fell short. She was becoming part of the colony in ways that went beyond charity. She was becoming useful, and more importantly, she was becoming loved, openly, by more of our people than had opposed her in the beginning. Even some of the elders who had once spoken against keeping her began to soften, watching her grow, watching her laugh, watching her offer her own small rations to a Kathiri hatchling who had received less than his share that week. It was 2 years after we found her that everything I had feared finally arrived, though not in the way I expected. We had grown careless, perhaps, or simply unlucky. A supply run to a nearby trading post, something we did rarely and carefully, drew the attention of a group that made its living finding things other people wanted hidden. I do not know exactly how they traced us back to the debris field. Perhaps someone spoke too freely at the trading post. Perhaps our shielding was not as perfect as we believed. Whatever the cause, 3 ships entered our debris field on a morning that began like any other, and by the time our scanners caught them, they were already close enough that running was no longer an option. The alarm through the colony was a sound I will never forget, a low, pulsing tone that every Kathiri had been trained since birth to respond to instantly. I was in the hydroponic bay with Ivy when it sounded, and I saw the color drain from her face as she recognized the sound for what it was, even though she had never heard it triggered for something real before. "Stay close to me," I told her, and she did not argue. The ships that found us were not human. That was the first small mercy of that difficult day. They were scavengers themselves, opportunists who had heard rumors, perhaps from that trading post, of a hidden colony holding something valuable. I do not think they knew exactly what they were looking for. I think they simply knew that a hidden colony this careful about its secrecy was hiding something worth taking. They were wrong about many things, but they were not wrong that we had something worth protecting. Korash organized our defense with the calm precision of someone who had done this before, in other places, against other threats, long before I was old enough to remember. Our colony was not built for open conflict. We had a handful of defense systems scavenged and repaired over years, enough to make an attack costly, but not enough to guarantee we would win outright if the attackers pressed hard enough. I placed Ivy in the deepest, most protected chamber of the colony, the same reinforced room we used for our youngest hatchlings during emergencies, and I made her promise to stay there no matter what she heard outside the door. "I don't want you to go," she said, gripping my hand so tightly it nearly hurt. "I have to help defend our home," I told her, "but I am not leaving you, not ever. I will come back for you the moment this is over." I do not know if that was a promise I had the right to make. In truth, none of us knew if any of us would survive what was coming. But I made it anyway, because it was the only thing I could offer her in that moment, and because I intended to keep it with everything I had. The hours that followed were some of the hardest our colony had faced since the loss of our homeworld. I will not describe every detail of it, only that it was chaotic and frightening, and it asked more of every Kathiri involved than any of us had trained for. We lost 3 of our own that day, good people who had lived quietly and asked for nothing more than to survive in peace, and their loss will remain with me for the rest of my life. But we held. Barely, painfully, we held, and as the intruding ships finally withdrew, too damaged to press further, I ran back through the smoke-filled corridors toward the reinforced chamber where I had left Ivy, my heart pounding with a fear I had not allowed myself to feel until that exact moment. She was still there when I found her, curled in the corner exactly where I had left her. Tears streaked down her face but unharmed. She ran into my arms the moment she saw me, and I held her the way I had held her the very first night, counting the beat of her heart against my chest like a small miracle I refused to lose. "You came back," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I told you I would," I answered. Later, once the injured were cared for and the lost were mourned in the quiet, careful way our people honored grief, Elder Korosh found me sitting alone outside the medical bay, worn down in every way a body and spirit can be worn down. "They came chasing rumors of something valuable," he said quietly, sitting beside me. "They did not even know what they were looking for. Next time, Veshtal, they might, and next time, it might not be scavengers with 3 poorly maintained ships. It might be someone far more capable of finding what we have tried so hard to hide." I understood what he was telling me, even though he did not say it outright. Hiding Ivy had kept us safe from the fear of what humans might do if they found her. But hiding her forever was no longer a plan we could depend on. Sooner or later, by accident or by force, the truth would surface, and when it did, we would need to be ready for whatever came after. I looked through the small window nearby, out at the drifting debris field that had sheltered us for so long, and for the first time, I let myself imagine a future beyond hiding. I did not know yet what that future would look like. I only knew that the little girl asleep in the medical bay beside me deserved more than a life spent as a secret, and that whatever it cost us to give her that, I was prepared to pay it. The decision to send the signal was not made in a single meeting. It took weeks of quiet arguing, sleepless nights, and one terrible near miss with another passing ship before Elder Korash finally called the full colony together and said the words none of us wanted to hear. "We cannot protect her forever by hiding," he said, standing before all 300 of us in the largest chamber we had. "And we cannot protect ourselves forever either. Our defenses grow weaker with every year, our numbers grow smaller, and the galaxy grows less forgiving of secrets, not more. If we wait for someone dangerous to find us, we lose everything. If we choose the moment ourselves, we at least choose who learns the truth first." The plan was simple to describe and terrifying to accept. We would send a signal, not to any pirate frequency or trading post, but directly toward known human space, carrying enough information to identify Ivy and enough of our own colony's location that a rescue, if one came, would know exactly where to look. I argued against it at first, out of pure fear. Every story I had ever heard about humans painted them as a species that answered every threat, real or imagined, with overwhelming force. Sending a signal directly into their territory felt like sending an invitation to our own destruction. But Ivy was 9 years old by then, and her body had begun showing signs that worried Mira deeply. A weakness in her bones that Mira believed came from years of a diet never quite matched to human needs, however carefully we had tried. A persistent cough that would not fully clear despite everything Mira attempted. Things our medicine, built for our own biology, simply could not fix no matter how hard we tried. "She needs care we cannot give her," Mira told me privately, the night before the vote. "Not someday, soon. If we wait much longer, Veshtal, we may lose her to something we could have prevented, simply because our pride kept us from asking for help." That settled it for me, more than any argument about defenses or discovery ever could. I stood in the meeting the following day and voted in favor of the signal, and to my surprise, so did most of the colony. Even those who had once argued loudest against keeping Ivy in the first place understood, by then, that whatever she cost us, she had become one of ours, and a parent does not abandon a child to spare themselves risk. We sent the signal on a quiet morning, coded with what little we understood of human communication protocols, carrying Ivy's name, a description of her condition, and coordinates that would lead any who answered directly to our hidden colony. Then we waited, and the waiting was its own particular kind of fear, stretched thin across every day that passed without response. It took 11 days. I was in the hydroponic bay with Ivy, showing her how to graft a damaged plant stem, when the alarm sounded again, different this time from the raid alarm, a steady tone that meant an approaching ship had been detected, not attacking, simply arriving. We gathered at the edge of our sensor range, watching the readouts with held breath, and what we saw defied everything I had imagined. Not one ship, several, moving with a precision and coordination that spoke of a force far beyond anything our small colony could have resisted if their intentions had been hostile. "That is a full search and rescue formation," Korash said quietly, reading the sensor data over my shoulder. "Not an attack fleet. They came to find her, not to conquer us." It should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown, of standing before something vastly more powerful than yourself and hoping, with no guarantee at all, that it means you no harm. I held Ivy's hand as the lead ship approached, its hull marked with symbols I did not recognize, its size dwarfing anything in our own small fleet many times over. I felt her fingers tighten around mine, and I realized with a strange ache that she was as frightened as I was. Whatever memories she carried of her own people, they had faded during the years she spent as one of us. To her, in that moment, she was not returning home, she was leaving it. "Whatever happens," I told her quietly, "I am not going anywhere. Do you understand me? Whatever they say, whatever they want, I will not leave your side unless you ask me to." She nodded, though I could see the tears gathering in her eyes. The ship's arrival was formal, careful, and far calmer than I had braced myself for. A smaller vessel detached from the larger formation and approached our landing bay slowly, broadcasting a message in a language none of us fully understood at first, though the tone was unmistakably one of caution rather than aggression. Korash made the decision that I would be the one to meet them, alongside Mira, since between the two of us we had the most understanding of human language, however limited it remained. I asked Ivy to stay back with Dessa, and for the first time since we had found her, she refused me outright. "They're my people," she said, her voice small but firm. "I want to be there." I could not argue with that. I did not have the right to. The three of us walked to the landing bay together, and I will remember, for the rest of my life, the exact moment those doors opened and I saw humans for the first time with my own eyes. They were smaller than the stories had led me to expect, dressed in protective gear, weapons carried but not raised, faces set with the particular tension of people prepared for danger but hoping not to find it. At the front of the group stood a woman with sharp, watchful eyes and hair pulled back tightly, a rank insignia on her shoulder that I would later learn marked her as the commander of the entire search and rescue operation. Her name, I would learn soon after, was Captain Daniel Whitfield, though it was a man beside her, not her, who first spoke, his voice careful and slow, clearly trying to be understood. "We received a signal," he said, "identifying a missing child, Ivy Bennett. We are here to bring her home and to make sure she is safe." Ivy stepped forward, out from behind me, and every human in that landing bay went still. "I'm Ivy," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "These are the people who saved me." I do not know what the humans expected to find at the end of that signal. Perhaps captors, perhaps something far worse, given the fear that colored so much of what we had heard about how the galaxy viewed our own missing information about them, and how little any of us truly understood about each other. What they found instead, standing behind a frightened but healthy 9-year-old girl, was a colony of small, exhausted, frightened aliens who had spent 2 years giving up their own limited resources to keep a stranger's child alive. Captain Whitfield studied us for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before she finally spoke directly to me. "You found her," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice steady despite everything in me that wanted to shake. 2 years ago, her shuttle had crashed. She was alone and injured, and we could not leave her that way. Even knowing what could happen to you if you were discovered. Even then, I said, something shifted in her expression, something I could not name at the time, but would come to understand much better in the days that followed. She turned to Mira next and asked, gently, about Ivy's health, about the persistent cough and the weakness in her bones that had finally pushed us to send the signal. Mira answered every question with the same careful honesty I had used, and I watched Captain Whitfield's guarded expression soften further with every answer she received. A medical team moved forward to examine Ivy, and though I saw the fear flicker across her face at the approach of strangers in unfamiliar gear, she looked back at me first, and I nodded, and she let them near. "We're going to take good care of you," one of the medics said gently, kneeling to Ivy's height. "Can you tell me if anything hurts right now?" "My chest sometimes," Ivy said, "and my legs get tired really fast. But Mira has been helping me. She's really smart." The medic glanced toward Mira with something like surprise, and then respect, and I felt a small, unexpected swell of pride on Mira's behalf. What followed over the next several hours was not what any of us had braced ourselves for. There was no demand for surrender, no ultimatum, no show of force meant to remind us of our own smallness against their strength. Instead, there were questions, careful and thorough, about our colony, about our history, about the 2 years we had spent caring for a child who was not our own. There was medical assistance offered freely to any Kathiri who needed it, not only to Ivy. There was, most surprising of all, something that felt very much like gratitude. Captain Whitfield stayed with us long into the evening, speaking through a translation device her crew had rapidly assembled once they understood the shape of our language better. She asked me, near the end of that long day, why I had chosen to hide Ivy rather than report her presence to any authority, human or otherwise. I thought carefully before I answered, because the truth felt important to get exactly right. Because the rule we were taught said to protect ourselves first, always, above everything else, I said, and I could not make myself believe that rule was worth more than a child dying in front of me. I do not regret breaking it. I would break it again. Captain Whitfield was quiet for a long moment after that. Then she said something I did not expect at all. "Where we come from," she said, "there is a saying, you judge a person or a people by what they do when no one is watching and nothing is asked of them in return. You had every reason to walk away from that wreck. You had every reason to let her go, or worse, and no one would ever have known. Instead, you gave up your own safety, your own resources, 2 years of your own lives, for a child who was not yours." She paused, studying me with an expression I had not yet learned to read. "That tells me everything I need to know about your people." I did not fully understand, in that moment, exactly how much weight those words would come to carry. I only knew, standing in that landing bay as the last light of our small colony's day cycle faded outside, that something enormous had shifted, not just for Ivy, but for all of us, and that whatever came next would change everything we had spent 2 generations trying to hide from. They took Ivy for treatment aboard their medical ship the next morning, and I will admit, freely, that the hours she spent away from me were some of the hardest of my life, harder in some ways than the raid we had survived only weeks before. I trusted Captain Whitfield's word that she would be returned to us, but trust built in a single day is a fragile thing, and I spent every one of those hours pacing the landing bay, waiting. She returned by evening, walking on her own 2 feet with a strength in her steps I had not seen in months, her cough gone, color returned to her face in a way that told me, more clearly than any words could, exactly how much her small human body had been struggling against a diet and environment never quite built for her. She ran to me the moment she saw me, and I lifted her the way I had the very first night, though she was heavier now, taller, more herself than she had been in a long time. "They fixed me," she said, laughing through what might have been tears. "Veshtal, they fixed me." "I can see that," I said, and found that my own voice was not entirely steady either. Captain Whitfield approached more slowly, watching the reunion with an expression that had softened considerably since our first meeting. Beside her walked a man I had not seen before, older, dressed differently from the medical and search teams, with the particular bearing of someone accustomed to speaking with authority. He introduced himself as Ambassador Nathan Blake, and I understood, from the moment he spoke, that whatever came next in this conversation carried weight far beyond a single rescued child. "I have read the full report of what happened here," Ambassador Blake said, addressing not just me, but Elder Korash, who had joined us by then, along with Mira and Dessa. 2 years of care, at real cost to your own people, for a child who was a complete stranger to you, from a species your own history taught you to fear above all others. I want to understand something clearly, if you are willing to tell me. Why did you keep her, when every incentive you had pointed toward turning her away, or worse?" It was Korash who answered this time, not me, and I was glad, because I think the question deserved an answer from someone who carried the full weight of our history, in a way I, still relatively young, did not yet fully carry myself. "Our people have been running for 2 generations, Korash said. "We lost our world. We lost most of what we were. And in all that running, in all that loss, we very nearly lost something else too, something harder to name. The part of us that still believed helping a stranger mattered, even when it cost us everything to do it." He paused, glancing toward Ivy, who stood listening with wide, careful eyes. Veshtal did not ask permission to save her. She simply could not walk away. And in watching what that choice cost us, and what it gave us in return, I think our whole colony remembered something about ourselves we had nearly forgotten. Ambassador Blake was quiet for a long moment, and I watched something pass across his face that I would later come to recognize, in humans, as genuine and deep respect. "I want to be honest with you," he said finally. "There are people, back on Earth, who will hear this story and see only risk. An unknown species, capable of hiding an entire colony from detection for years, now known to exist close to human space. Some will argue for caution, for distance, perhaps even for control. I do not agree with them, and I intend to make that case strongly, but I want you to understand the conversation you are about to become part of, because it will not be simple, and it will not happen quickly." I felt my chest tighten at his words, old fears rising again despite everything that had happened that day. But he continued before the fear could fully take hold. "What I do know," Ambassador Blake said, "is that a report like this one does not stay quiet for long. Ivy Bennett was reported missing 2 years ago, presumed lost along with the rest of her shuttle's passengers. Her return, alive, healthy, and cared for this entire time by a species most of Earth has never even heard of, is going to become public knowledge whether any of us intend it or not. I would rather Earth learn the true story first, from people who witnessed it directly, than learn a distorted version of it later from rumor and fear." What followed, over the weeks after that conversation, was unlike anything our colony had ever experienced. Ambassador Blake requested, and Korash agreed, to allow a small human delegation to remain near our colony, not to control or observe us as a threat, but to properly document what had happened, and to begin the long, careful process of formal contact between our 2 peoples. Ivy herself became, in many ways, the strongest voice in that process. She was interviewed extensively, always with someone from our colony present at her request, and she spoke of her 2 years with us with an honesty and warmth that no official report could have matched. She spoke of Dessa's off-key singing and Mira's sleepless nights working out human medicine from old data files, and the way I had refused to leave her side even when the whole colony argued about whether keeping her was worth the risk. I did not know, until much later, exactly how far her words traveled. Ambassador Blake later told me that recordings of her interviews were shared, with our full consent, across major human news networks, and that the reaction across Earth had been immediate and overwhelming. People who had never heard the word Ka theory before were suddenly speaking it in homes and public squares across an entire planet, moved by the story of a small, struggling species who had given up their own limited resources to save a stranger's child simply because it was the right thing to do. 6 weeks after that first ship arrived in our debris field, Ambassador Blake returned to our colony with a formal delegation and a document that would change everything about our future. He gathered the full colony together in our largest chamber, much the way Korash had done before we sent the original signal, and he read the terms aloud, slowly, so that our translation systems could keep pace. "By the authority granted to me," he said, "and following unanimous approval from Earth's governing council, the Ka theory people are hereby recognized as a protected species under full Terran interstellar law. This designation guarantees military protection against hostile action from any outside force. It guarantees medical, structural, and resource support sufficient to allow your people to rebuild what was lost, and it guarantees full recognition of your sovereignty and self-governance, with Earth acting only as ally and protector, never as ruler." The chamber was silent for a long moment after he finished speaking. 300 Ka theory, who had spent 2 generations learning to expect nothing but fear and scarcity from the universe, struggling to process words that promised the exact opposite. I looked toward Ivy, standing near the front of the gathering beside Dessa, her small hand raised in a wave toward Ambassador Blake, a grin spreading across her face that told me she had known this moment was coming, had perhaps even helped shape it in ways none of us fully understood. Ambassador Blake found me after the announcement, once the chamber had erupted into a mixture of disbelief, cautious hope, and slowly building celebration. "I want you to understand something clearly," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for me. "This is not charity, and it is not payment for services rendered. This is Earth recognizing a debt, and Earth does not forget its debts. You didn't just save a stranded child, you saved a Terran citizen, cared for her as your own, at real cost to yourselves, for 2 full years, expecting nothing in return. We remember that. We will remember it for a very long time." I did not know how to answer him fully in that moment. I only knew that the fear I had carried my entire life, the fear every Ka theory hatchling learned before they learned to fly, had been built on a story about humans that turned out to be only half true, or perhaps not true at all. We had been taught to fear their strength. No one had ever told us to consider what that strength might mean when it stood beside you instead of against you. Ivy found me later that evening, after the celebrations had quieted and the colony had begun, slowly, to imagine a future none of us had dared to hope for only days before. She climbed into my lap the way she had when she was smaller, though she was nearly too big for it now, and rested her head against my shoulder. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. "A little," I admitted. "Everything is changing very quickly." "Good changing, though," she said. "Right?" I thought about the reinforced chamber where I had left her during the raid, about the 3 lives our colony had lost defending our secret, about 2 years of sleepless nights and stretched rations and quiet, constant fear that one day the wrong ship would find us before the right one did. I thought about how all of that had led, somehow, impossibly, to this moment, to a document promising protection and partnership from the very species we had spent generations hiding from. "Yes," I said, holding her a little tighter, "good changing." Outside the window, the debris field that had hidden us for so long drifted on in silence, no longer a shield against a hostile universe, but simply the place we had called home while we waited for a future none of us could have imagined arriving quite this way. 15 years is a long time by any species counting, and standing now on the surface of a real world again, solid ground beneath my feet instead of a hollowed-out asteroid drifting through debris, I still find myself amazed some mornings that any of this is real. Our new colony sits on a small, quiet planet Earth, helped us settle 3 years after that first document was signed, a world with breathable air and fertile soil, protected by a standing agreement that no hostile force may approach it without answering directly to Earth's own defense forces. We have hospitals now, built with human engineering and Cathiri design working side by side. We have schools where hatchlings learn both our own history and the history of the species that chose, against every fear either of us once carried, to stand beside us instead of against us. We have more than 300 Cathiri now. We have thousands, families who once scattered across the edges of known space, finally finding their way home to a place that no longer requires hiding to survive. Elder Korash did not live to see all of it. He passed peacefully, several years into our resettlement, old even by the careful counting of Cathiri years, having spent his final seasons watching a species he had once been certain would destroy us become, instead, the reason we survived at all. I think of him often, especially on days like today, when I walk through streets he never imagined might exist for our people. Dessa still sings, though these days it is mostly to her own hatchlings, 3 of them now, each one as stubborn and warm-hearted as she has always been. Mira retired from active medical work only recently, though she still consults from time to time on the rare occasions our doctors, trained now in both Cathiri and human medicine, encounter something unfamiliar. She likes to remind everyone, whenever the chance arises, that she was the one who first figured out how to keep a human child alive on a diet built entirely from guesswork and old data files, and she is not wrong to be proud of it. And Ivy. Ivy is 24 years old now, taller than I ever expected a human to grow, though I suppose I had very little to compare her to when she was small. She spent her early adult years splitting time between Earth and our colony, studying diplomacy and interspecies relations at a university that specifically requested her by name, given her rather unique childhood experience with exactly the kind of work they were trying to teach. She serves now as the official human liaison to our colony, a role Earth created specifically for her once her studies were finished, though I suspect she would have found her way into that work regardless of any official title. She moves between our two peoples with an ease that still amazes me sometimes, translating not just language but understanding itself, smoothing the small misunderstandings that still arise now and then between two species who spent so long knowing nothing at all about each other. She visits my quarters most weeks, still, even now, and we sit together the way we did when she was small, though the conversations have changed considerably over the years. It was during one of those visits, only a few weeks ago, that a small Cathiri hatchling named Peya, the daughter of a family who had settled with us only recently, wandered into my quarters while searching for her mother, and stayed, curious, once she noticed Ivy sitting there. "Why does she come here so much?" Peya asked me, tilting her head in the particular way hatchlings do when a question has fully captured their attention. "She's human. Humans have their own world. Why does she keep coming back to ours?" Ivy laughed softly at the question, but let me answer it, the way she always has, out of some old unspoken understanding between us about whose story this really was to tell. "Because this is her home too," I said, "just like it was when she was smaller than you are now." "But why do the humans protect us so much?" Peya pressed, with the particular persistence hatchlings often carry before they learn there are more complicated ways to ask a question. "We're not even the same species. Why do they care about just us, out of everyone in the whole galaxy?" I thought about that question for a long moment, longer than perhaps the answer required, because I wanted to give her something true, something worth remembering long after this conversation had faded from her young memory. "Humans do not measure kindness by species," I finally said. "They measure it by the act itself. A long time ago, before you were born, one of us found a lost, frightened child and could not make herself walk away, even though every rule she had ever learned told her to. She was not protecting a human that day. She was protecting a child. It was only much later that anyone thought to ask what species that child belonged to." Peya considered this with the particular seriousness only hatchlings seem able to manage, then looked toward Ivy with new curiosity. "You were the child," she said. "I was," Ivy said, smiling, and Veshtal was the one who found me. Were you scared? Peya asked her. Living with a whole different species. At first, Ivy admitted, I don't remember all of it. I was very small. But I remember Dessa singing, even when she wasn't very good at it. She glanced toward me, warmth in her expression that 15 years had done nothing to dim. And I remember Veshtal never once making me feel like I didn't belong, even when I know now how much it cost everyone to keep me safe. Peya looked between the two of us for a long moment, then asked one more question, quieter this time, almost hesitant. Do you think Earth will do that for us again, if something bad happens? I did not have to think long for that answer. Earth already made that promise, I told her. The day they declared our whole people protected, not just one child. They do not forget a debt, and they do not forget what kind of people we were, when it would have been so much easier to be something else. Peya seemed satisfied with that, in the particular way children are satisfied with an answer that feels true, even before they fully understand why, and she wandered off soon after to find her mother, leaving Ivy and me alone again in the quiet of the evening. Do you ever think about it? Ivy asked me after a while. What would have happened if you had walked away that day, left me in that wreck? I had thought about it, more times than I could count, across 15 years of a life that had turned out so differently than anything I had once expected for myself or my people. I think about it, I admitted, not because I regret my choice. I have never regretted it, not for a single day. I think about it because it reminds me how close we came to losing something we did not even know we were capable of becoming. A frightened colony, hiding from a universe we believed only wanted to destroy us. If I had walked away that day, I think we would still be hiding somewhere, waiting for an ending we had already convinced ourselves was certain. Ivy reached over and took my hand, the way she had 100 times before, across 15 years of a bond built first out of desperate necessity and grown, slowly, into something neither species had a word for before we found each other. I'm glad you didn't walk away, she said simply. So am I said, and meant it more completely than words could ever fully carry. Outside, the sky over our small, protected world was beginning to darken into evening, stars appearing one by one across a horizon no longer haunted by the fear of what might be searching for us in the dark. Somewhere far beyond those stars, Earth carried on with its own vast and complicated business, largely unaware, on any given ordinary day, of the small colony it had promised to protect forever. But we knew. We remembered every part of how we arrived here, every sacrifice, every fear overcome, every small, stubborn choice that had led one frightened Kathiri to lift a dying child out of a broken wreck instead of walking away. It had cost us more than we ever expected to give. It had given us back more than we ever imagined receiving in return. And if I close my eyes now, even after all these years, I can still feel the exact weight of that small, frightened heartbeat against my chest, the very first night I chose, without knowing anything about what it would cost, or what it would become, that some lives are simply worth protecting, no matter the rules that say otherwise.